Question: what would you say is the most important spiritual practice we can undertake, and why is it important? Well, I would never even attempt to answer that question, because in my mind there is nothing we can say this is the most important spiritual practice, because it implies that this is some superior practice that's important for all people. And what I explain in many of my videos is that the spiritual path has many stages, many levels, and people are at different stages. So at the different stages, there are different spiritual practices that are important for people. And what often happens is that, I think it's more of a problem in the Western world than in the Eastern world, I think. But again, I grew up in the West, so maybe I'm not aware of it. But what we have in the Western world, we always have this very linear mindset. So we're always looking for an end goal, the ultimate something, the ultimate truth, the ultimate spiritual practice, the most important spiritual practice. And it's just, there's so many people in the West, we grow up, as I said before, we grow up not knowing anything about a spiritual path. We are either exposed to Christianity, which tells us there's only salvation through Jesus and the outer church, or we are exposed to materialism, which says there's no such thing as salvation or spiritual growth. So either of those two extremes, they are telling us there's only one level of human consciousness, and that's that. But the spiritual path is based on the realization that there are many levels of consciousness possible to us. And the whole purpose of the spiritual path is that we start out like everybody else with a human level of consciousness, perhaps not the lowest level of human consciousness, but a certain level of human consciousness, and we gradually transcend it until we attain a more and more spiritual awareness, where we don't see ourselves anymore as limited human beings who are victims. We see that we can take command of our own state of mind and attain self-mastery. So, most people, when we first find the spiritual path, we are at a certain level. And we think that now we find this guru, this teaching, this practice, and we want to think that now I'm home, now I've found the ultimate. If I just keep studying this teaching, following this guru, practicing this practice, then I'm going to make it. And I have met this myself in several organizations, and I'm sure there are many of them out there. My first one was Transcendental Meditation, and it was stated there that Transcendental Meditation is such a unique, efficient spiritual technique, it's all you ever need. If you just keep practicing Transcendental Meditation long enough, you'll reach cosmic consciousness. And my second spiritual organization was an organization called the Summit Lighthouse, talked about Ascended Masters, and the practice there was invoking spiritual light from the Ascended Masters by giving these decrees, which is a rhythmic verses that rhyme that invoke light from the Ascended Masters. And it was said there that if you just keep doing these decrees long enough, you will qualify for your ascension. You have other practices where they do meditation, they do contemplation, they do this or that. But you can probably find 50 different movements or gurus out there who claim that they have the ultimate practice. And if you just keep doing this practice, this in itself will get you to the goal. And that is a false claim. It's simply a false claim. Okay, and I realized this the hard way after many years, because there is no outer practice that is going to automatically bring you to the goal. I've actually talked about this in several videos. Because the outer practice can have certain beneficial effects, but really the essence of spiritual growth is that you shift your consciousness. And that is not going to happen by meditating or by prostrating yourself on the floor or by mouthing off decrees at high speed. It's just not going to happen. It requires a shift. And those shifts can be brought about in various ways, and the practice can help bring it about, but there's no automatic path here. So what I'm trying to say with all of this is that it's actually not beneficial to consider what's the ultimate spiritual practice. Because there isn't just one. There is one, or there can be several, but it's a matter of what level are you at. The ultimate spiritual practice for you, right now, at the level you're at, is the one that will bring you to the next level up. Once you're there, the ultimate spiritual practice is the one that will bring you to the next level up. And that continues as long as you're on earth. This whole idea of the ultimate springs from the ego. And I talk about the ego a lot in some of my playlists where I talk about ego illusions and ego games. And one of the ego games is you always want the ultimate. You want to be so special because you have now found this enlightened guru and you are practicing this wonderful practice that's guaranteed to give you results. And in a way, you can say that's fine because we grow up, most of us in the West, without having any awareness of spirituality. And so we find a spiritual path and we just have to start somewhere. So it's natural we start out with this dreaming about the ultimate. And it's fine if it lasts only for a time, but for some people, they get stuck in it. I mean, I learned Transcendental Meditation back in 1976. And I have since then practiced various other things. But there are people who are still practicing Transcendental Meditation like they did in 1976, perhaps using some of these more advanced sitting techniques, but they still think that's all they ever need. And how can I say whether it is for somebody else or not? But in my observation, most people, the vast majority of people, need more than one practice as they follow the path during their lifetime. And, you know, so it's again this. Why are you on the spiritual path? Why are you a spiritual person? Because you have some inner knowing, inner intuition that this is important for you. So what you have to go with is you have to always try to follow that intuition. And this means that if you find a spiritual guru or a spiritual movement that has a certain practice and you feel intuitively you should go into this, go into it. Follow that practice. But be aware of the most common temptation on the spiritual path, which is that you're using your intuition to find a certain spiritual practice. And now you decide with your outer mind, this is the ultimate practice, and all I need to do is to continue meditating 20 minutes morning and evening, and I'll make it. That's the outer mind overriding your intuition. What you need to do is continue with the practice, but have an open mind, an open heart, so you can hear it when your intuition tells you it's time to look for something else. If you do that, you will make maximum progress. If you allow your outer mind to fixate you that you have to continue doing this practice, you will not make maximum progress. I'm not saying you won't make any progress, but you won't make as much progress as you could have done if you had listened to your intuition. And most people have, all spiritual people, have a life plan for what we want to achieve, what growth we want to achieve in this lifetime. And so it is already plotted in your life plan what spiritual practices you're going to practice and for how long and when you need to move on to the next. But you won't know this with the outer mind. You will only know it by following your intuition. So for me, I was 18 when I found the spiritual path, found the concept of a spiritual path. And my first spiritual practice that I came in or was exposed to was Transcendental Meditation. And it was perfectly right for me to do this as an experimental process. But it only lasted a few years. And then I actually needed something else. And because I wasn't listening enough to my intuition, I had 3 or 4 years where I was sort of in between. I was not happy with the meditation movement, but I hadn't found something else. I was stuck in this no man's land. I've seen this happen to many other people too. You get disappointed by one spiritual movement or practice, and then you don't know what to do. You're sort of in limbo. And I was for 3 or 4 years. I felt my life had no purpose and I wasn't getting anywhere. But then I heard about the next thing because I gradually became more open. And then I found the teaching of the Ascended Masters, and they have a practice of invoking spiritual light. And for me, that was very, very important to do this. And I think many people can benefit from it, but to say that everybody can benefit from it, that's the step too far. So it was very, very important for me to invoke spiritual light. And I talk about it in several videos why it was important. But I have also, as I did this for some time, I've also started more and more focusing on my psychology. It actually started back in the early 1990s, where I started going to therapy, using various forms of therapy, because that was when I realized that beyond the practice, the essence of the spiritual path really is to resolve psychology. And first I was really focused on specific issues, finding specific issues. Like, for example, I was in therapy for a little over 6 months, where I focused a lot on my childhood. Not that I had a particularly difficult childhood, but I still had some issues, especially with my father. And I worked on those. And then over the years, I would study other things. And so I was more taking the view that I have certain unresolved psychology, certain problems that I need to overcome. And so you could say that, and I was still doing the invoking light. But you can say that it shifted from invoking spiritual light to my practice became resolving psychology. But then as I had resolved some of this psychology, I started focusing more on, instead of overcoming problems, of attaining a higher state of consciousness. And however I saw that, which shifted over time. So my practice now became, instead of resolving dysfunctional psychology, attaining a higher state of mind, a higher, more free psychology. And as part of that, I started doing what many teachers today call self-inquiry. This wasn't something I learned. I never heard about Ramana Maharshi until a few years ago, or this Vedantic system of self-inquiry. It was just something I partly did because of Ascended Master teachings, and partly just spontaneously I started asking myself, who am I? What kind of being am I? And why am I here? What's the purpose of life? And so gradually, again, I was still invoking spiritual light from the Ascended Masters, but my practice became more this self-discovery, self-inquiry, who am I? And so I think there are some patterns there that I think most people will go through. In the beginning, you come with a lot of baggage. Whatever your childhood is in this lifetime, but even beyond that, we've had previous lifetimes. So we come with a certain burden. Many teachings call it karma. I like to look at it in a slightly different way, that we have unresolved psychology, have what I call these subconscious separate selves in our subconscious mind. And as part of those selves, there's accumulated a certain amount of low-frequency fear-based energy. And so we have to dissolve the energy. And there are various practices that can do that. For me, the most efficient was invoking light from the Ascended Masters. But it's also a matter of coming to see the selves and the illusion. So that's resolving psychology. And then when we have done that to a sufficient degree that we are over this, we've gotten rid of a lot of the baggage, we can start focusing on developing our self-mastery, mastery over our own minds. And as part of that, there will come a phase where we start asking these questions: who am I? Why am I here? What kind of being am I? And as a part of that, we are sort of disassociating ourselves from first the physical body, then our feelings, we are more than our feelings, then our thoughts, we are more than our thoughts, and then even our sense of identity. We are more than a human being. We are not the kind of person we were brought up to see ourselves as in our culture and family. And we begin to realize and experience we are spiritual beings that descended to earth, and all of this outer personality is just an overcoat we've taken on. So as part of that process, we are taking off the overcoat, one at a time. We have several coats and overcoats and shirts and undershirts and this and that. And we're taking it all off until we reach that pure level of awareness that we descended with. I call this the conscious you, experience itself as pure awareness, and we attain a greater and greater connection to our higher selves. So you could also look at it that there may be an outer practice, a technique you're using, but behind it is this practice of attaining a more and more clear connection to our higher selves, which is really shifting our identity away from all the outer personality to realizing we are extensions of our higher selves, what the masters call the I am presence. And so what I'm trying to say is practice isn't just about a particular technique like meditation or chanting or prostrating yourself on the floor or yoga or whatever, mindfulness, whatever it is. Practice is really not just a technique. It's a mindset. It's a pursuit of a higher state of consciousness. It's shifting your sense of identity. It's discovering who you really are and shedding who you are not. So this is also practice, but it's of course more diffuse, and that's why many people, and myself included, I mean, if you had told me this 30 years ago, it would have been too much for me. At the time, I needed something. Here's a simple technique. Invoke spiritual light from the ascended masters and you will make progress. That I could deal with at the time. I couldn't deal with who am I and all of these kind of things. So again, whatever level of the spiritual path you are at, follow your intuition, pick the practice that resonates with you. But don't let your outer mind shut off your intuition by making you think, now you have the ultimate practice. This is just ego that wants to be special. And it wants you to believe that this practice is so special, and the fact that you discovered it means you're so special, and therefore you don't need anything but this, because this is the highest, this is the ultimate practice. It's just an ego game. I mean, there comes a point where you just have to look at it and let it go. And you will be a lot freer when you do, So, what would you say is the most important spiritual practice? It's always the one that brings you to the next level of the path. And you can only know this intuitively. You cannot decide this with the outer mind. And you should not let other people or some kind of guru talk you into saying, this is the only thing you will ever need. It will not give you maximum progress. Listen to your intuition. Discover your individual life plan and don't let anybody tell you what it is or isn't.